And no one ever thinks about our 40th country. They always think about the first, the second.
That 34% of British workers don't use their workplace health benefits.
Amazon's been personalizing to us for decades, however long, but it's something we haven't really cracked in the benefits industry.
Welcome everyone to Friends with Benefits. This is the essential podcast for reward and benefits leaders. I'm David, one of the founders here at Ben, and today I'm solo. Carl couldn't make it, unfortunately, but we have a really special guest in Mark that we're really looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, I guess without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So Mark, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, David. It's kind of nice to get out and about and chat about a fun subject.
Maybe we start with a quick introduction, right, to yourself. Kind of, how did you get into this crazy world in the first place? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I probably like most people. I think a lot of us in the industry don't necessarily set out to be in benefits.
I have yet to meet one.
We sort of fall backwards into it, but I guess my background is slightly more unconventional. So actually, originally I was a professional cyclist in my kind of late teens, early 20s. Sort of traveled around the world, but in between that I was working a bit in finance. Right. And so I kind of, when I retired from racing in, shows how old I am, 2006 now, I kind of just fell into finance, just for where I'm from, the Isle of Man. And actually it wasn't long, I moved from a bank to Zurich International, and actually that's where I got into the sort of benefits world with their international pensions.
Right.
It's actually where I started with some of the benefits technology as well.
Were you working for Zurich as internal as a benefits manager, or just in the wider group?
So I was with their corporate life and pensions business. Okay. So I actually started out in the benefits world as a provider in the insurance, and it's super niche, the sort of international pension stuff. Yeah. So ironically, I started working, my clients were now my peers, if you like, sort of global HR leaders in other areas. So that was the first introduction to benefits in the world of technology and other areas. That took me out to Asia. I spent 9 years living in Singapore.
All right.
And kind of moved out of the provider space. Did a short time in a digital agency. So
not benefits.
No, I got out of benefits.
Couldn't resist.
Yeah, and sort of loved the digital side, but these things happen. I got drawn back in, and at this time I kind of drawn into a broker. I joined at Aon. Yeah, I was a senior global benefits consultant for them. And then I sort of worked through a few brokers, and then I then moved in-house with BCG, Boston Consulting Group. They happened to be a client previously. I was doing some work, and then I sort of joined them initially to launch wellbeing at BCG, but also early on the technology journey, which then over the last sort of 5 years has got me deep into benefits tech, rolling out platform in 40 plus countries, and all the fun and complexities that will come with that, which I'm sure we'll pick up in the conversation as well.
Amazing. Yeah, great background there. Thanks so much for chatting. And I guess one of the segments that we like to do is to chat through some things that are in the news recently to kind of keep things topical. And so the article that came up that we wanted to bring up is one around, saying that 34% of British workers don't use their workplace health benefits. So maybe kind of initial reaction to that, surprises, like thoughts. Yeah.
To be honest, when you sent me the link and I had to read through it, it didn't surprise me. Yeah. It didn't surprise me in the slightest, because I think, as it sort of says in the article, but as we know, the complexities of trying to navigate this stuff. Yeah. I think it's always ironic as well. It's when people really need the health benefits, when they're not feeling great, stressed, etc., they then have to go through this complexity of navigation. And a lot of the time they just kind of give up. I think my other observation of this, and I think this space that we're kind of operating in, is that a lot of the health benefits, certainly in the UK, were designed to complement the NHS. Yeah, we all know about the problems with, the challenges with the NHS, and I think that's perpetuating the problem, is because there's an expectation from employees that private medical is instead of NHS. Yeah, it's not, but the providers haven't been able to catch up. Costs have obviously hit, so I think we just ended up this perfect storm of that people don't know where to go. So it didn't surprise me. That part of it. I think the other piece is benefits professionals. We've kind of maybe overcomplicated around telling people about stuff. We'll tell them based on product rather than actually we provide a healthcare benefit suite. Here's how you navigate it. This is the overall program. We tend to want to get the technicalities, the policy, the T's and C's, and it's like it makes us feel good. But for the end user, the consumer, I just want to know where I go to get my dental or my physio or whatever it is. So that's. I mean, it's not even a new problem. It's a problem that hasn't been solved for 20 odd years of kind of doing this stuff with benefits tech and communications.
Yeah, and why? I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're so excited about what sort of is possible now with the new technology and AI and things like that, and actually bringing people in. But why do you think, in general, right? Like benefits are very
34% of British workers
in most cases
don't
kind of
use
low
their
engagement.
workplace health
Like
benefits.
people don't know where to go, how to access it. Is complex products as well. I mean, it's true of insurances, of pensions. Anything that you've seen in the market that kind of has worked to counteract that?
It's an interesting question because it's probably, what I've asked myself over the years, whether I've been advising clients or actually as a client as well. But I always come back to the fundamental basics of the technology is an enabler. It's not going to solve a lot of the bigger challenges, which tend to be around design principles, reviewing the program, because most of them are, I've come across policies that are 40 years old. The wording is just so outdated. I think that's one of the problems in terms of the fundamental kind of basics and baseline. And then the problem that we always come back to is communications. It's the so what factor. You might have the best programs in the world and the best policies, but if you're not communicating it and people aren't understanding what it means to them as an individual, then they're not going to engage with it. And I think that's also one of the challenges that we have as an industry is how do we communicate some of that complexity in a more simplified way, and how do we make sure that it resonates then with that kind of multi-generational workforce? Because a standalone program, let's say a health program, can be great, but it might benefit different people in different ways. And so how do you think about that? Which is where we have the chance with technology, and particularly with AI. But the technology is not going to do it for us. There is still a lot of that kind of design principles that I think is often it's bypassed because it's like,
hard, right?
It's hard, It's that the technology should do it for us, right? Now it's like, you need to plan first, then you can accelerate, and the technology then helps that. But I think that's the thing that I've seen, again, over 15 plus years working with different sorts of benefits technology. That fundamental principle hasn't changed. I don't think it'll change going forward.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we at least talk to when we're implementing or going through. You can't just rip and replace and, as in like just take what you have, put it on a platform and expect incredible results out of doing that, right? Like just putting it, yes, it'll help, right? But at the end of the day, you have to look at the actual design, right? And if Carl were here, he'd very much be saying that like technology is great, but it's what's in it, right? Like that actually matters and how people, perceive it, and is it relevant and will they use it?
I think, I'm sorry, I think that's almost the part that you said is that I think it's one of those traps that people fall into with implementation is they say that it will do it after the implementation.
But then you never touch it, right?
It never happens. And I think that's one of the key learns I've had over the years going into this is you've got to have those fundamental design principles, almost kind of a universal design before you start, because that's where you get the scale from. I've experienced it myself, and I've seen other clients that have set out on a really ambitious project. We're going to do tens of countries in 18 months, and 5 years later, only a few countries implemented, or
it's not uncommon at all.
And it comes back to that piece of actually, what are you designing for? Who are you designing it for? What do you want them to get out of that experience? And is my fundamental benefits base fit for purpose before I put it on a technology platform?
And maybe we go there, right? Because one of the things that you've obviously had experience of rolling this out across multiple countries, and again, we were talking about a bit earlier the complexity of doing that. Any kind of additional learnings if there are other people who are looking to go on this journey or thinking about doing it? How would you advise people to think about it?
I think we could fill about a series of podcasts with the learns along the way. But I think one of the key ones, we hear it all the time, and I've heard it from lots of different leaders, whether they're benefits leaders, whether they're business leaders, etc., is this continual perception that benefits are purely local.
Yeah.
Particularly in a global sense, it's like, well, yeah, that sounds great, but all benefits are local, a certain element. And I think, but that's the key learn is, when some projects that I've been involved with, and certainly the big project that I've been working on, I wasn't there at the very start. And one of the observations was they went and started working individually with each country, and they allowed a lot of autonomy and veto power for the country to make that decision, which on the surface is great, right? You want to make sure they're happy client, etc. Even an internal client. But I think that's been part of it, is allowing so much customization and bespoking for your early countries ends up creating a lot of longer term problems, because it doesn't allow you to kind of scale, consistent principles. Most of the time it's kind of an 80-20. Yeah. You look across the world. I've been in global benefits now for, again, 15 plus years. Sorry, it just makes me feel old when I don't feel old.
Experience,
there you go. A veteran of the industry, sometimes they call it. 80% of it's consistent, and you can design for that. And then where's the 20% customization? Because most of the time, again, another experience from that is you give all this autonomy to a local country.
Yeah.
It's not their full-time job. They're generally a HR generalist. They might be a finance person. You're giving them a lot of decisions to make that they're not necessarily familiar with.
Yeah.
Take that complexity away from them. Take some of the expertise away from them, and give them the right level of choice where they get what they need out of it. And then you've got the ability to sort of take it away and scale so that you've got a replicable model as you go into each of the next kind of wave of countries. That is probably the single biggest fundamental to get right at the start. And no one ever thinks about our 40th country. They always think about the first, the second. I think another observation that I've had around this space is, particularly if people are embarking on a multi-country, is don't start with the most complex countries. That tends to be what happens, because that's generally big budget base. It's where the pain is. It's where the immediate need is. Yes, you might need to have one or two that are critical, but don't front load all your complex ones. I've seen implementations for a single country take more than 2 years.
That's crazy.
I've seen others take 6 weeks.
Yeah. And what do you think makes the most difference there?
Those fundamental design principles of what is the look and feel. How do you create some consistency where you then allow, here's a few spaces where you can customize locally, but unless there's a legal reason or there's fundamental, it's all done for you. Most of the time people go, oh, great, thanks. And they know they've got a little space. I think, again, we often have this assumption it's either all global or all local.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It just, I've seen so many different combinations of it. It is definitely one of them. The data collection, the consistency of the data collection. Is another one, which actually I think is where AI gives us an opportunity, but also we've got to be careful not to assume that the technology does it for us. Even with AI, it's still garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And how do you then go, okay, you might think that there is 20 benefits, but if you look at them across a number of countries, do they really go into a subcategory? Do those 20 things ultimately fall under, I think you'll see it a lot more in the well-being space, but gym benefits or mindfulness. There's a lot of these things that might have an individual vendor, but fundamentally it's the principle of delivery. There's probably so many more along the way, but having that kind of design principles and clear kind of scope of, okay, this is what we're going for consistency. This is where the customization or the kind of the tailoring will come from. Gives you a lot more of that capabilities.
How do you think about the big buzzword around harmonization, and how do you make sense that you have something that is consistent global minimum standards, or is that a thing even? Yeah. How do you think about that?
I think with any of these buzzwords, is they mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
And that then becomes the problem. It's like, what do you mean by harmonization? Because different businesses will think of different things. Like my old broken head harmonization thinks about, how do you get some of the terms and conditions consistent? Yep. Whereas for other organizations, it might just be that, well, we want to make sure that we've got a gym membership somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, you see that with, again, way back when I seen it in Asia with flex benefits. It's like, it's a big word. It means a lot of things. I think we see it
totally different in the UK versus in Singapore versus like, what do you mean even by flex, right? So
exactly. So I think there's getting that kind of underneath a couple of things. What do you mean? What do you hope to achieve by harmonization? What do you hope to achieve by consistency? What do you want the end experience to be? Is more of an important question than, following a buzz because someone else is doing it. Again, it's, that's part of it, is each organization has a different culture and they might have a different outlook, and one of the big key learns from being externally and being a consultant or a provider to going internally, in the provider world, we make so many assumptions and then we get frustrated when a client, you go, but that's a no-brainer. Why didn't you do that? It's when you go in-house, you realize it's even more complexity of how does their finance operate? How do they, cross-charge across the world, cost centers? It's like, it creates a lot of that. So getting that early on and going, what roadblocks are we going to get into? What's your decision making? What's your business leadership? It is that fundamental kind of 101, but I think we often forget those pieces at the start. It's like, oh, too busy to do that piece. We'll just get straight into when can we get the first kind of country launched. It's one of those things of you need to go slow to go fast.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting insight in the sense like sometimes people just want to see something in the screen as quickly as possible, right? And I think previously you also talked about, the rollout of the technology itself is not the end goal in of itself, but it's just the beginning. It's like, what do you mean by that? And the beginning of what?
It's an interesting one because, I think, again, being in-house as a benefits leader, we often know the reasons why we're doing this, but you've got to sell it out to the business, to the C-suite, to the board. So they see your investment, they see a big number, and they're like, when are we getting the implementation finished?
Yeah.
Now, I think with other non-benefits related technologies, that might be the end state because it might automate a business process or a finance process, etc. But I think the problem then with the benefit side of it is the success or the failure and the engagement is reliant on post-launch for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
Not the whole implementation process. But I think we often pack the schedule or we don't plan far enough in advance to go, okay, and then once we've launched, here's the next 6 or 12 months, or here's the next 2 or 3 years, because you're going to have to roll through different changes. And so the big difference with benefits technology is it's an ongoing,
there's always another renewal.
Integral
there's
part.
Always,
and often businesses will scale up with temporary resource to get the technology in. They roll off and go into something else. And you've got then small benefits teams that are then trying to run these things.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult because that's not
part of the job.
Not a lot of the day-to-day benefits, leaders. And so that, again, those design principles, but I think as well, I've seen it a number of times is, again, because we're rushing for a launch date, it's like, oh, well, we'll do the comms plan afterwards. And it's a bit like the benefits redesign, all great intentions, but a benefits redesign never happens after launch, or 89% of the time does. Same thing with ongoing communications. You get a great launch, you get bang, you get a high peak, and then everybody forgets that they've got it because guess what? We've got so many other login sites, other things. And then one of the things that I would say for anybody kind of starting and thinking about it is how do you make it really clear and simple and memorable for somebody to access the platform? And whilst it sounds basic, a lot of businesses now are single sign-on SSO.
Yeah.
If you can get an internal domain that people only have to think about the domain and the brand, they don't have to think about any other login, guess what? It's a lot easier to get people in the platform.
Yeah.
Because you go to, benefits.abc.com.
Yeah.
Boom, SSO goes straight through, and you start to then drive people more ongoing. You know, in the UK, we have a lot of, you know, year-round benefits.
Yes.
But in a lot of other countries, you don't have that. And so, you know, we could see really strong engagement in Europe, for example, because there's stuff to do year-round. But certainly in Asia, where it's, you know, it varies across the markets, but you can see these real big spikes, great engagement, someone called engagement at the start. But then, you know, you look at ongoing and no one's using it. And it's like, well, that's where your investment is. It's not to get it launched, it's to get people using it. And what's your success measures?
Yeah. So how do you think about that, right? Because it's one of the things that we hear a lot of, at least, is folks struggling to get people engaged, right? And what does that even mean?
Good question. Yeah. What does it mean, right? I think, again, it comes back to the intended purpose of the benefits.
Yeah.
Why are you offering benefits? I mean, it was always to sort of generate a bit of reaction. But when I was on the broking side, I'd often get clients or, you know, my now peers going, I just need to get my insurance premiums down.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't buy it. What do you mean? I'm like, well, you're not mandated to buy it. So you want to get your costs down. Don't buy it. Oh, but, you know, we won't get this and that attraction. Okay. That's the reason why. Think about what are you trying to do with it. And then as you're building your site, your technology, your communications is, what is it for? What do you want to promote with people?
Yeah.
One of the things that this kind of bigger project that I looked at, we revamped the whole branding and the user experience probably 12 months into the project. We were live in 3-4 countries maybe.
Okay.
But what I set in the fundamental principles and said to the team is that first preamble, that first kind of paragraph that people read should tell them what it means to them as an individual. They don't need the technicalities. Is in 3 or 4 sentences, what does this benefit mean to me? What is my company making sure that I've got income protection, for example? It's one of those that fundamentally no one forgets.
Know what it is. Yeah.
But if you say to somebody, look, you know, if you're in an accident, etc., you can't work for however long, this pays your salary.
Yeah.
Of course they want that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits to look at, to understand the so what factor. That's what then drives a lot of that engagement is, what are people going back? How do you use videos? How do you use updates? How do you use kind of principles of breadcrumbs across your other channels to drive people into the platform rather than communicate across 25 different channels and people don't know where to go?
Yeah, it's one of the what I kind of, why I'm so fascinated about the industry of things is one of the only areas that you see companies just investing so much money and so much time, right, in creating a really great program, a really good package for all the good reasons, right? And then, people just don't engage, and companies have to overinvest over and over and over on, you know, recommunications, like keeping things fresh. It just doesn't, it's crazy, right? That, like, again, companies are spending all this money on this, and yet for an individual employee, just not necessarily appreciating or seeing the value of what it is.
And it's sort of trying to, you know, a lot of companies will do employee engagement surveys of their areas, but it's trying to then look at those and go, okay, within this feedback, where can I use the benefits platform to communicate some of, you know, debunk some of the myths or promote certain areas? Is how do you make sure it's more targeted to the problems? You know, mental health has been a big headline around a lot of areas, but I've seen peers, I've seen organizations almost go, we need to get a point solution out there. We need to give a big bang. We've done this, but then they see no engagement afterwards. And what they fail to then, well, not fail, but what isn't necessarily at front of mind is actually some of the great benefits you've already got built into your healthcare benefits, for example.
Yes.
But again, people don't automatically, and as consumers, they don't automatically associate my healthcare plan with support for that. But if you can actually help people navigate those channels, I think it's an opportunity with AI, but it's something that's that's been there for a very long time, is this theory of personalization.
Yeah.
And
not a new word, right?
I don't know why we can't crack it in benefits. You know, Amazon's been personalizing to us for decades, you know, or however long, but it's something we haven't really cracked in the benefits industry. Maybe it's the complexity, but I think some of that is that design principles again. But hopefully with the right type of AI, we might get those opportunities. But I think it comes down to understanding your audience, creating some personas. Like I said before, it's like, again, you might have an all singing, all dancing health program, but if you're only communicating that to one segment of your population, then there's no wonder that a third of, people aren't using the benefit. Because if you're not telling them what it's related, we know that a lot of the younger generation, when it comes to health benefits, they think they're invincible until they need it. Well, how do you then make sure that they know where to go when they need it in an emergency? There's a lot of mixes. I think the harder answer is there isn't one single answer. There's no quick fix. But it needs to be worked through in a lot of questions and a lot of probing. And, I think it also takes partnership across kind of client, technology vendor, and the actual provider space to kind of get beyond the boilerplate and go, actually, what does it really mean? But it takes that partnership, and it takes some courage from, peers and leaders to really push and ask 2 or 3 times, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what does it really mean? What does your employees really want? And how do you get beyond this benchmark? Well, everybody else has got it, so we've got to have it, versus are people really valuing it? What are they valuing? What are they wanting to use? And some of that is still that, again, it's not a new problem. It's a problem we've been trying to deal with for 15, 20 years.
And you were just speaking there around like this, the so what factor and making it relevant, personal to the employee. I guess like any strategies that you've seen successful in that place, bringing together the partnership of client, provider, consultant, everybody together to create that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate that I've kind of worked in some of those, what I often refer to as sort of tripartite relationships. But it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work. It takes actually clear intent and communication, because often there may be one of those 3 parties that is resistant to the collaboration, because they feel they need to demonstrate value. They feel like they might get disintermediated. Whatever, there's multiple reasons, but I think it becomes that open, honest dialogue of, look, we're not here to kind of squeeze on price. We're not here to kind of destroy anything. We just want to get a really good outcome. How can we work together? And then how do we find the data? Because again, there's so much assumption in this areas that we assume as industry professionals, whether you're provider, consultant, in-house, we assume. We don't ask as often, I think, because we're often scared to ask. If you ask people if they want choice, they're going to say yes. But I think if you go out and you really find out what would you trade off? What do you truly value? And this is what these things mean, then actually you'll find a lot more answers. I was actually speaking to a business leader recently that had done this with a kind of a smaller scale, but 100 people in their office. And rather than just assume, said, okay, across this kind of whole health and well-being stuff, what is it that you really want? What are you really going to get value out of or use? And he said he was blown away by some of the ideas that came from these kind of groups or focus groups that were easy to implement, low value. They put a small budget towards them, and people really valued it. That it's having that courage to ask, but ask in the right way. It's almost like in consulting speak, a conjoint analysis. But how do you say, well, look, you've got one thing here. What would you trade off with? I think you'll get a much better view of it. And guess what? If people have been engaged in it, and the majority of people have said this is what they're going to value, people are more likely to engage, versus some of those benefits that I think we hang on to for a long time because there's 2 or 3 maybe vocal users. But is that really, we invest a lot of money. Is that really a critical benefit, or is it perceived that we can't get rid of that. And again, I think I've seen that a few times where I've had to encourage teams to kind of, look, you need to let go of some of these. Like, you've got 5 providers here delivering this kind of suite. You've got 1 provider here that can wrap it all together. Oh, but, I'm like, you need to take that risk. And guess what? No one really kicks up.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
But I think that's, again, it still comes back to some of those basic principles, right?
People are scared of making changes, right? And especially
change
when it's
hard.
Yeah.
Change is really hard. Yeah. And then, again, as we talked about the complexities of benefits in one country, the complexities of technology, the complexities of you start to scale this thing up. It's big and scary and hard and tiring.
It's very different products, and it's insurance, it's complicated stuff. So and I like the idea of doing more of this co-joint analysis, because in most cases, if you just go out and survey people and they'd be what do you want, that's a bad question, right? You're going to get bad answers. You're going to get people putting a lot of stuff out there that once you launch, I've seen it time and time again, people just don't use. Then what's the whole point of it anyway? So being like, hey, if you had to trade it off, a much better question, right? Like in our case, what we tend to look at is how are actually people voting with their money, because in most cases we're implementing these flexible allowances so people can decide how to spend it, and that'll give you a very good indication of what people want, because they're actually spending the budget that's being given to them right behind it.
It's an interesting one though, because I've seen that over the years is, are people using it because they value the benefit, or are they using it before they lose it?
Yeah, they're trying to maximize it. It's a good question.
Because I've again, it probably comes back to that comms piece. It's a lot more when I was in Asia, particularly in flexible benefits clients, and when they had flexible spending accounts as opposed to flexing up and flex down your insurances. 11 months in, they would email everybody and go, you need to spend this before you lose it. And then I've seen, it scare you with some of the things that I've seen claimed on benefits that...
I don't think it's scares me. I see the data of how people use their budgets. So.
But I think that then comes back to it is that intended purpose?
Yeah.
And, maybe the simplification is, okay, how do you not look at the whole, but you look at health benefits, for example, and protection and then retirement, and you segment them. And if there is those lifestyle benefits, they are a lot harder to accommodate for. But if you're comfortable budgeting within that way and people are using it, and again, I think tech's enabling that. You probably see it with the virtual cards. You can kind of tie into a lot more of the merchants. But again, it still comes back to design principles. What do you want to offer? Why do you want to offer it? What values are going to add to you as an organization as well as your employees?
And maybe we go there for a second. Like, how do you track? What do you think are good impact metrics to track? Everybody talks about, I don't know, ROI, utilization. Those are hard things to do, right? Especially because it is on the ROI side, it's a multivariate problem. As in, it's not as simple as being, I spend X, I get Y. Because there's so many different factors that are being impacted by it, whether it's absenteeism or turnover, productivity or engagement, however you want to define it. So how do you prove value in terms of what is offering and talk about impact?
Again, that's $1 million question, right? It's for me, the truest testament of the value of benefit is an employee's experience story.
Yeah.
It's because I think a lot of the benefits that we spend a significant amount of money on, they're a safety net. Yes. They're kind of the things that you don't really want people to use.
Yeah.
So you can't really use engagement around that. But actually, you want to make sure that when they need the help,
it's there.
Bang, it's there. It works. It's and because that's your, can't kind of think of the actual phrase, but that is your true point, because for 99 people that might experience it, and if it's okay, they'll be happy, but they won't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And there'll be one person that'll have a really bad experience, and they'll tell everybody. And guess what? It doesn't matter how good your program is. Word of mouth travels fast, and there's such a perception that I think, particularly with social tools, whether they're internal, Teams, Slack, these things kind of spread like wildfire. And whilst on the surface that, it's peer to peer and they're trying to help people, you see, again, because of the complexities, you see a lot of misinformation perpetuating. Like, how do you make sure that people understand what it's for and what that experience is? And so you could look at all of those metrics around the world, and you could be, mitigating medical claims. You could be, we paid out X amount of claims. That one experience can just destroy that kind of trust in one go. But again, it comes back to communications, right?
Yeah. So how do you tell that story to leadership, etc.? Especially maybe you're asking for more budget, you want to do more things. Yeah.
Again, often you kind of come up against I've heard from such and such a leader that this is their experience. And like, well, let's just break it down and understand it. But how do you get those advocates? How do you find those people that would be comfortable to share those snippets? How do you make your communications and campaign promoting those experiences? Because that's what you need to get. Is it talking heads? Is it podcasts? Is it a kind of a little quote with a picture? But that's where the rubber hits the road, is people telling other colleagues, wow, my employer provided this, I was able to use this in a moment of need, or, I was able to do this, which I wouldn't normally have been able to access, a gym or actually one of the great experiences I've had recently. And I kind of, again, I had one of these benefits, not kind of naming brands, but I was never necessarily using it because I live in the countryside. A lot of the vendors that are accessed are in London. I thought, you know what, I'll have a quick look. Anyway, I found that near me in Cambridge there was a flotation tank experience.
Yeah.
Wow. But that, just being able to go and try it, I've now found it's way better for me than any other kind of form of relaxation. And it's like, but I wouldn't have found that, but I'll then happily share that with people. I put it out on LinkedIn, and you can, but it's those type of experiences. How do you encourage people to be able to share that experience?
Yeah.
That's the wow factor.
And to provide it as well, as in that's where the association just becomes super powerful. It's like, hey, I would never have done this unless I found it through the employer, right? And that then builds the relationship employer to employee, which is ultimately part of what you want the benefits to do in any case, right? The other thing that you were saying there that I thought was quite interesting is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is actually, a lot of benefits reward professionals need to see themselves as, going back to the personalization point, as marketers, right? At the end of the day, you're marketing your program, you're marketing product, you're marketing things. So just because you're giving something to somebody doesn't mean they're going to take it or want it, right?
Yeah.
Any kind of reflections on what you've seen being great? You mentioned that BCG, you were kind of have internal podcasts and things like that you guys were doing. Yeah. Anything that you've seen be particularly sort of successful in terms of marketing benefits, well-being programs and the like?
Yeah. I mean, I think you absolutely hit it on the nail on the head in terms of actually benefits, utilization, benefits, engagement is a marketing exercise. It's a branding exercise. It's a value, it's employee value proposition.
Yeah.
How does that fit overall? So actually, again, collaborating across those channels, either it's your recruiting team, what are they hearing from candidates that aren't successful because they might have heard a competitor's got something similar. What's the truth, what's not? But actually, what I've actually seen work really well, and to raise the profile and the value of health and wellbeing programs is live webinars, but not broadcasting, interaction, community. So I used to bring in some really good, different quality speakers, but when we brief them, and I used to do a number of myself, is always pause after the first 10, 15 minutes and get the audience participation. Get them to ask questions, because guess what? They give you so many more ideas than your assumption of, your script, your PowerPoint. And I think it's the same with sort of benefits, is even if a benchmark, for example, or even if, industry says we need to go down this route, if your employees are telling you that they value something different, and often it's not the all, dancing bells and whistles, it's something that's relatively low cost implementation wise that people will truly value. And so how do you track that sentiment? So I think that's where we've scaled stuff. That's where I've seen stuff scale, is you get the success stories, again, you can either tell them across employees and make sure you collect those, because after post-launch, we've had some great feedback from leaders, particularly like senior leaders going, wow, even they didn't know what benefits we had.
Yeah.
And they'll talk. So how do you get your senior leaders to talk about some of these things? But also, as you're scaling across multiple countries, is that sentiment also works to share from HR to
country
HR.
to country. Yeah.
What have you learned along the way?
Yeah.
How can you learn from some of that? But I mean, I know a lot of these things are slightly less tangible metrics, but those kind of live interactions, it's been nice when I've had employees kind of bump into me in the lift and go, "Oh, thanks for launching that such and such benefit. You know, it's great, and I can get this and I can get the other." And often I'm like, "Don't need to thank me because the local team put it in, but because they've seen it on the platform, and because they've been able to get a benefit out of it, and they've shared with that community." And then how do you then track some of that? I think that's where the data comes in. You know, so I don't think it's a tangible, like, single number.
Yeah.
But if you think about, you mentioned about the sort of spending, is what's the trends, not the individual kind of line items, but if you look across trends of, let's say, health and nutrition and, a couple of other categories you might see in that, is it serving the intended purpose? Or are people going, for example, where, it might be a fitness benefit, but the way that the providers opened up their network, people are going for haircuts and nails.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah.
That's where the interesting paradox comes from is, yes, it might be painful to remove some of the investment from or close down the areas that people are spending on, but does that outweigh your intended investment and the intended purpose? Not an easy answer,
No.
but that sort of trending is much more, it's a much more way of understanding how to structure your whole benefits. And again, I think because we've ended up with so many point solutions, we look at these things in silo. And actually,
can you say a little bit more about that? As in, like, you look at health, you look at protection. Is that what you mean? Or
even across the life cycle of healthcare benefits.
Yeah.
So again, I mentioned about sort of mental health and, a big area.
Yes.
These big investments in point solutions that are then scaled back because, it's a big investment.
Like therapy or coaching or...
Yeah, and mindfulness and other, I think a lot of the self-help, the self-engagement, there's been the assumption that you roll out an app and everybody's going to use it. Yeah. And guess what? We've got millions of apps on our phone. Yeah. And I think often we're trying to plug a gap for a problem that's in a different place. And I see it a lot more in the medical and the healthcare space is, we know medical inflation around the world is double digit, but it's not going to get below double digit anywhere for the foreseeable. Yeah. Trying to tell a CFO that is looking to try and make savings to say, even if we get 8% increase, that's a win.
That's a success. Yeah.
Because everything else doesn't work on that parameter. You've got to explain what it is. But the other way to look at it is, well, what is driving your costs? What is actually making up in your health risk? And then how do you understand that and then actually implement point solutions or other things at the start of that supply chain? So one of the things that a project that I managed to recently sort of work on in the UK was actually how to pull all that health life cycle into an integrated solution so that actually people can access at point of need through either an in-person, a telephone, or a virtual light, so that you're only going through one door, and then you get navigated to the right place depending on what you need. But that was the UK. That was the first in the UK to ever be done. And I was told by some industry professionals it's not possible. I'm like, it might not have been done, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And again, I think some of those are. You'll only really see the true benefit 3, 4, 5 years down the line. I think that's some of the challenge, the life cycles of budgets and other areas. But if you're able to look at that data and see maybe, in your health plan that mental health claims and say musculoskeletal claims, physio claims are growing exponentially more than other general health. Well, actually, you can make an assumption that if you can intervene earlier, then your cost saving for that, particularly if it's integrated, can be a lot lower over term than a catastrophic, claim, knee injury or whatever. or back injury, other areas that are sort of linked to burnout, excessive work, we all know these terms, is that's a lot more expensive down the track than some early interventions. Yeah. And again, it's nothing new. It's been around for a long time, but technology
people aren't doing it enough, though. It's like,
but technology can now allow us to do it, but we have to think differently.
I mean, one of the things that is interesting there is we talked about it a little bit earlier is like, AI, buzzword, right? But it is really amazing the types of things that you can do with this technology that wasn't available even 3-4 years ago, right? Like, what are you seeing in terms of the impact that can have? One of the things that we've implemented, for example, going back to what you were saying, is this kind of care pathway, right? Of how do you help an employee to get to some help that is impactful to them, but you do it in a triage kind of way, right? So like in our system, for example, employees can go in and ask questions and say, I have back pain. And then the system will actually respond and be like, hey, well, we have this MSK thing first, and then this to this, and go to this kind of front door, right? And then ultimately, if it's the right thing for them to do, they obviously go claim on a medical, but it's not what you start with. So try to navigate people to the right points with low cost resources and things. And the cool thing about AI is it can be very personable to that, to respond to that specific individual based on all the data that you have on them, right?
Yeah.
That's just one example. What else have you seen as interesting? Is it as transformative? Is it all just BS? Like, what have you seen out there?
It is transformative, but there's also a lot of BS.
Yeah.
So it's trying to take it between. I'm a geek at heart. I'm an early adopter. I think I started using ChatGPT in like 3 months after its launch. So I've been playing around with this stuff for probably
really early
2.5 years. And I think I think laterally, and so for me, it's actually been a game changer because I can connect disparate ideas across different experiences. I've seen people struggle with adoption because they're probably trying to think in more of a linear fashion and kind of, an old chatbot, it's a yes/no question. And it's hard to design for. But I think there's huge potential if you get the design principles right, and if you understand the desired state, the desired outcome, or the types of behaviors that you're kind of wanting people to do. I think there's actually much more power in the background for us as benefits professionals. It helped us rapidly scale implementation. So, 4 years to get to 15 countries and then 27 countries in 1 year.
Wow.
And it came down to sort of two principles of leveraging Gen AI, quite mundane and boring, actually. Not this, well, because that garbage in, garbage out, it took quite a lot of manual work for my team to collate old school on spreadsheets, but to be able to then bring some kind of structure to that data, we're then able to collect a lot more efficiently, and like the fact-finding process, from 6 months to 6 hours, type of kind of change in scale. But again, it's not a turn the switch. You'd still need a solid structured data, not necessarily database, but you need at least some structure. But that's one thing that, massively helped us scale. The other one was content. So again, each company has a different tone of voice. It comes back to the marketing piece, right? As benefits professionals, we might not necessarily think about marketing principles of tone of voice and personas in other areas. I've got some marketing qualifications in the background, and my wife's a marketeer, so I've heard a lot of this over the years, so I kind of get it. But by being able to build some of those instruction sets, and that's what it is at the end of the day, you've got to give it a good enough instruction set.
The prompting, you mean?
The prompt. It's not even the prompting itself. I think this is also the bit where potentially people have got fear of AI because they fear that they've got to get the right prompts. Whereas actually where I've found bigger success is custom GPTs. Or custom gems, or, whatever version across all the LLMs. And it's the instruction set in the back of that actually is much more critical rather than the individual prompts. Because if you design, again, it comes back to that universal design. If you can get you can train an individual, because at the end of the day, you're training an artificial brain, but it's something like you're training a junior team member to answer a lot of queries is like, these are the design sort of areas that you need to think about. And here's your parameters. That instruction set in the background, then irrespective of the prompts that people put in, are going to navigate to the close enough answer. Because this is where the technology can do it like that. But the problem with hallucinations and therefore the risk around healthcare and other things is a really challenging area. I think my observations are, don't make it too broad. Don't make the GPT try and do everything. Because guess what? It's quite likely to hallucinate. But if you can do something around some of your health insurances, or that, if you can keep the parameters fairly close, then, and you can test it, and you need a pilot group and you need enough. But some of the pilots that I did, unbelievable the answers. And again, this is where that tripartite relationship comes in, is I would be kind of just standing up a GPT. Like, they're quite quick to stand up, but then I'd run a few scenarios, or again, you employee sentiment, take those frequently asked questions, put them in, see what you get, but more importantly, share them with the provider. So I've done it where I've sent it to the medical provider and gone, look, here's the questions that we got from employees. I put them in the GPT. Here's the answers. How did it do? 95% of the time they said, unbelievable, but here's a couple of things. And that's where you can then tweak and kind of go, okay, here's your risk, here's your other areas. But I think, again, in that sort of hyper-personalization space, it will do 80% of your queries. And you need to get to a point, if it's really complex, it needs to go to a professional. But I think, again, we often design for all or nothing, as opposed to where is your low-hanging fruit, where's your volume? That's where this stuff will really give, benefits professionals and others a lot more efficiency to deal with some of the more strategic pieces that we often don't get to.
I think that's a really powerful insight, in the sense of, I think a lot of folks that we talk to, at least, they're really excited about it, but they're still fundamentally scared, right? In terms of, okay, but what if this happens? Who's at risk? Who's liable, etc. And so putting in those guardrails to be like, hey, these are the types of things that you can do and can't do, and rolling it out, right? And actually, because it won't go astray. So like having the confidence that it won't do that, I think is a really powerful way to think about it. Awesome. I think we're coming up on time. So there's a segment at the end that we like to ask all guests, which is a benefits confession. So, Mark, what's your benefit confession, right? What is the thing that you wouldn't tell everybody, but we're making you tell everybody now?
Benefits confession. Oh, I don't know. There's probably too many. From going from a kind of provider and consulting side to client side is... you realize afterwards, it's like you spin on a certain amount of stuff when you're in the provider side that you then realize in retrospect of like, oh, geez, that probably wasn't the right idea. But I think
mine was like in just as inspiration, right? But this was a bit different because of the provider side. It was like, the first time we rolled out, we didn't have all the stuff that we were saying that we could do, etc. And having that impact then and be like, okay, that was maybe a bit too far, which is very common in the industry. Right?
Very common in the industry,
but I didn't know that at the time. So it's like when we were starting, but and then Carl's, for example, was around when he was an underwriter, he loaded up the rates of the rival football team to the ones that he was on, which is that's a pretty good one. But don't know if that's the spark. Anything.
I think probably it's not. There's probably not a specific one, but it's probably been around driving and implementing a benefit because I think it's the right thing. On my personal views, and not listening enough to actually. You're probably right. You've over the years you'll have a lot of people going, no, it's never going to work. And I'm like, yes, it is, and it's that kind of don't be too stubborn when implementing. It's never too late to not implement something. Or I think where it is not having the strength to actually sunset certain benefits. That's probably more of the one is, if
it's the wrong thing to do.
If I look back at any of these sort of things over the years, is not pushing hard enough to sunset irrelevant benefits is probably the biggest kind of regret, if you like.
Awesome. Mark, thanks so much. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. And if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to Friends with Benefits on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. See you next time.